and talk about capitalization, founder stock, different structures for founder shares. This can be really dry stuff. You know, I love it. I live it every day. This is what I do. My wife says stop talking about it. I can't. But please ask me questions because it'll make it much more interesting for you guys. So if you have questions as I'm going through, feel free to just shout them out or throw things at me, whichever gets my attention best. So go ahead. So we'll talk about a few things this morning. We'll also do formal Q&A at the end if you want to save stuff up, but please feel free to interrupt me. Key formation issues that you should think about as you're setting up your company, how to structure the company, a brief summary of the different types of financings and convertible notes, and this will be brief. Each one of these subsections around financings, we do an hour or two detailed session going into the structures, so this will be very superficial. If you have specific questions, like if you're going through a process right now or you're thinking about it right now, go ahead and yell out specific questions. I'm happy to help. And then major mistakes. Again, we could go for hours and hours on that point, but we won't. Next. Choice of entity. We talk about this one a little bit because we're lawyers and we feel like we have to. We learned about it in law school. If you're in a different part of the country, the answers to these questions will be different. Here in the Silicon Valley and places like Boston, the message will be similar. You go to places like Texas, if you're in Austin, the message will actually be different. So there are four basic categories of structure that you might use when you're setting up a startup. C corporation and S corporation, an LLC, and a limited partnership. The first two are the same from a corporate law perspective. It's a corporation. It's what you think of when you think of a company. It has stockholders. It has a board of directors. It has officers. It has a president. It has a treasurer. It has a chief financial officer. But most importantly, it has stockholders. And it may have common stock. It may have preferred stock. It may have multiple classes of stock. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But it's what you think of when you're considering a company. Distinguish that from an LLC, and I'm going to come back to the difference between a C Corp and an S Corp. An LLC is a limited liability company. That's actually more like a partnership. So Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe LLP, we are a limited liability partnership. It's what you think of law firms being, where you have people like me who are partners. Well, I have an equity stake in the company, but I don't hold shares. I have a partnership, and we have this very complicated 85-page partnership agreement that describes all of the different nuances about how I get compensated, how I can join the partnership, how I can be removed from the partnership. The same thing happens with companies that decide to go down the partnership path. Very, very, very rare for a technology startup to be a limited partnership. It is less rare, but unusual, to be a limited liability company. The reason that you would want to be a limited liability company, which looks more like a corporation, you can have shares or you can have membership units and you can divide up the ownership of the company kind of like how you would set up a corporation with stockholders. The reason you might consider doing an LLC is that for purposes of tax, US tax, it's ignored. So if the LLC has profits, the LLC doesn't pay any tax on that. It goes directly to the members of the LLC, and they pay tax at whatever rate their personal tax rate might be. It's complicated. With an LLC, the documentation is painful. It costs a lot to put it together. It's very difficult to grant options. In fact, you can't grant options. You can grant things like profits units and profits interest, things that are like options, but they're a pain. Nobody understands them. It costs a lot to get your lawyers to draft it. Some people want to do it because they see the tax benefit. If you are never going to raise venture capital and you are going to be profitable soon, and so there are real tax benefits, it may make sense to do an LLC. Clean tech companies do a lot of LLCs because of the tax structures around project entities and things like that. Normal IT companies, it's very unusual. Frankly, they usually have losses for a long time. But more importantly, they have venture investors. Venture investors, for the most part, have a real problem investing into LLCs. Part of that is they don't like them, they don't understand them, they're unusual, they like to see what they know and love. But there's a technical issue because they have pension funds that invest in them. These pass-through, these tax favorable structures cause them a problem with their investors. Where you get kind of the hybrid, where you try to get the best tax benefit of the LLC or a partnership, but have the corporate structure, is an S corporation. And I said that the C corporation and S corporation are the same. The difference between a C and an S is purely tax, and you hear people talk about C corps and S corps, and that's referring to two particular sections of the tax code that describes how corporate profits and losses are treated. For a C corp, it's its own entity. It pays tax, or it can take loss and apply net operating losses, just like a normal corporation. An S corporation is taxed like a partnership. It gets passed through to the stockholders. The problem with an S corp is that it can't take institutional money. You can't have a venture investor invest into an S corp. You can't have somebody who has a company making its investments. You can't have preferred stock. You can't have non-U.S. investors. There are a whole bunch of restrictions around being an S corporation, because what it was really designed to do is create a tax favorable entity for U.S. companies who are still small. Once you get large, and if you start getting sophisticated in how you're raising money, they want you to become a C corp. It's relatively easy to do it. Most people don't bother. 9 times out of 10, maybe 95 times out of 100, people just go straight to a C corporation. That's usually what I recommend if you don't have a compelling tax reason to be an S corporation for an extended period of time. If you think you're going to raise money in 6 or 9 months, it's just not worth the hassle, because it's not hard from a legal perspective, because we file the same certificate of incorporation with the state of Delaware, but it's a hassle from an accounting perspective. Any questions on that? That's probably more than you ever wanted to know. But
does it matter which way, going from an S to a C or a C to an S, as far as?
You basically can't go from a C to an S. And it's the same thing. It's very difficult to go from a C to an LLC. The IRS makes it very difficult to go from a bad tax structure to a good tax structure. They're perfectly happy to take your money and go from a good tax to a bad tax, but it's hard.
When you're just starting out, you're bootstrapping, are there cost savings by going with an S corp in the first few years and then maybe morphing into changing into a C corp later on?
No, from a legal perspective, it's the same. Literally, the document that you file with Delaware is the same, and it will never change when you convert from an S corp to a C corp. The equity documents are the same. It's really a question of whether or not there's any tax benefit to be gained. And for most bootstrapping companies, the tax benefits are outweighed by the accounting costs.
From the moment you have an idea, what is the best time to create a company? Like, if you're going to start raising money in 30 days, or you're going to go an entire year before you ever raise money or get any customers, like, at what point, once you have that idea and you know, I'm going to do this, but it's unclear maybe how long the time's going to take, like, should you set it up immediately? Should you wait a while until you're closer to some sort of?
And like any good question that you ask a lawyer, the answer is it depends, and I'm going to ask you a question back. Is it just you, or do you have co-founders? When I talk to people, that's the most important piece, because, and we'll get into some of this in more detail. Startups are like marriages. If you have multiple founders, you're getting married to those people, and divorces happen. What setting up the corporation and assigning the intellectual property does, and setting up vesting arrangements, what that does for you is it puts a prenup in place. So that if somebody decides he or she is more beautiful and I'm going to leave you to go be with them, you're protected and they don't walk away with everything. If it's just a single founder and you're just coding away and you haven't gone out to market and you're just cranking for 6 or 9 months to build something, you don't need to incorporate. If you've got multiple partners, or if you're a single founder and you are going out and talking to people externally, signing up contracts, you're getting real estate leases, then you should incorporate. But if you're just banging away on code, wait. So fundamentally, when you're setting up companies, the mantra that we really try to present to people is keep it simple. And there are a whole bunch of different reasons for keeping it simple, not least of which is your legal bill. I would love to bill, I love to bill, but I love to bill people who can pay my bill. It's really frustrating for everybody when I send out a bill that they can't pay. So we do everything we can to keep things as simple as possible. Sometimes founders have almost an innate need, compulsion to make things as complicated as possible. And sometimes that complexity makes sense. You know, if you've got a foreign operation, you may need to have a more complicated structure. Or if you've got a bizarre set of founder arrangements and investors already lined up to do things, you may need to do something strange. But unless you have really unusual circumstances, you're almost always best served keeping it simple and doing what most other people do. It may not be optimized to the nth degree. You might be leaving something on the table, whether it's tax or potential liquidity options, but you're trading off known cost, known complexity for potential benefit in the future. So we usually say, hey, keep it as simple as possible. One of the things that we really suggest is don't have multiple entities. There are certain times when multiple entities make sense, where you've got a parent, a holding company parent, and a subsidiary, but not very often. Usually they involve companies that have foreign operations, or they have very special intellectual property situations where they got patents or some other IP where they want to keep it separate and they need to keep it separate. Otherwise, the classic example that we hear about all the time and get asked about is, so I'm the founder, but I've got somebody who is going to run a particular business. I've got 3 different businesses that we're going to have under an overarching parent company. I've got a guy who is going to run one of the businesses. I only want him to get equity benefit from what he does with that one business. So I want him to take equity in that subsidiary, but nothing else. You can do that, but you've just locked in enormous cost and enormous complexity, and you're going to have to explain it to investors, and the investors aren't going to like it. Investors like simplicity. That's the other big reason to keep things simple. As you're looking for funding, you're going to be one of thousands of companies that they will at least superficially look at. If you are a really, really, really hot company, sort of one of the top 20 companies that they're going to see all year, then maybe they'll put up with some weird structures and some complexity. But even then, only if you have a good story for why you have the structure. Otherwise, they're going to tell you to clean it, get rid of the crap. Don't put yourself in a position where, in addition to selling them on your business and selling them on your team and selling them on your technology, don't be in a position where you've got to explain your legal structure. That just frustrates everybody. so it really, I would keep it simple. We can't say that enough.
So